I'm a licensed therapist, and I think we have been teaching anxiety management backwards. Not wrong, but backwards. Skill 3 is often taught first. Skills 1 and 2 are rarely taught, if ever. I will explain what that means and why it explains everything that has not worked. You have probably been here. Anxiety spikes, heart starts racing, chest gets tight, muscle tension and spiraling thoughts, and every skill you know, the breathing, the mindfulness, the grounding, becomes completely unreachable, and it often doesn't work. And it's not because the skills are wrong, it's because your nervous system was already out of range before the anxiety hit. What I have seen in myself and the over 1,500 people that I have worked with is that they can tell me every tool they have tried, every breathing technique, and the type of journaling and mindfulness apps that they have used. But they use those tools in the throes of crippling anxiety, and it didn't work. This is not because they are doomed to suffer with anxiety forever. No, this is a sequence problem. And when I explained the 3 things that have to be built and the order they have to be built in, the gap between knowing what to do and being able to actually do it starts to close. And the third skill, which is usually the one most people use first, often backfires without understanding the first 2 skills. Here is what is actually happening. Most people think of anxiety as an event, something that shows up when a trigger hits. My anxiety was often debilitating and life-robbing. Many days were stolen from the inability to control my anxiety, and there were times when I was so desperate to use a substance or something to break the cycle of anxiety. But if you've heard any of my other videos, I'm an adult child of an alcoholic. I have to be very careful. I already have a hard no alcohol policy in my life, and I know how crippling anxiety could be, and one would do almost anything for relief. But what I see clinically and what I have dealt with myself for over 40 years is something very different. Anxiety isn't usually an event, it's more of an overflow of a system that was already running high. I was always focused on the peak of the anxiety when it would get really bad and painful. What I missed was the low hum, kind of like lightly lit embers burning that have not caught the whole forest on fire yet. I mistook the lightly lit embers for a system that was calm, or I would say, I'm just kind of type A or intense. And I walked around clenching my jaw, often to the point that my teeth would hurt, and I bruised them, according to my dentist. Not yet a cracked tooth, but bruised them pretty badly from clenching. I would breathe in, but I would never really fully exhale, and my muscles were always kind of semi-braced and vigilant. Research on something called allostatic load shows us that when the nervous system is under chronic stress, it doesn't return to baseline after each major stressor. It recalibrates upwards. The new calm is actually a chronically elevated physiological state. The fire embers have been burning for so long, the person can't even notice that it's running hotter than usual because it's become normal. And here's where the tool fails. When the anxiety finally spikes, when it becomes impossible to ignore, the nervous system isn't starting from 0 and hitting 5 on a 10-point scale. No, it is starting from a 4 and a 5 on a 10-point scale and often hitting 11 or 12. And then you hand a cognitive tool like mindfulness or observer awareness or reappraisal, all of which require the thinking, reasoning part of your brain to be available. And that part is the first thing that becomes unavailable when your nervous system is completely flooded. It is like trying to put out a fire with a kinked hose, except by the time the fire is big enough to notice, it's not water coming out, it's gasoline being poured on flames. The system was already running hot. The anxiety was not the ignition, it was the overflow. The skill isn't broken, it was just used at the wrong point of the sequence. So here are the 3 skills in the order they have to be trained. Skill 1, learn how to establish your actual baseline. Skill 1 is not a technique, it's more of an assessment or a recognition. Before you can actually regulate anxiety, you need to know what your actual resting state is, not what you think it is. Most people who struggle with chronic anxiety have never been shown how to accurately read what their nervous system is doing in the moment. They can name their thoughts, they can describe their feelings and the event, but the body signals, the jaw tension, the chest restriction, the breathing pattern, the shoulders that are quietly up near your ears, those are often invisible or they go unnoticed. Do you want to know if your nervous system is secretly running on empty? Do a quick 3-point check-in right now for your mind. Are you constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, or do you find that your mind is constantly looping the same anxious thoughts? Your body. Are your shoulders up near your ears? Is your neck tight? Is your jaw clenched? Is your breathing like completely shallow? Your routine. Do you struggle to sleep because you can't slow down enough to actually fall asleep, but then you feel completely exhausted during the day? If you checked even 2 of those boxes, your nervous system is probably stuck in survival mode. And there's a concept in research called interoceptive accuracy, your ability to accurately detect what is happening inside your body. People with chronic anxiety and chronic stress consistently show reduced interoceptive accuracy. The signal is there, the detection is impaired. You can't regulate a state you can't detect. Skill 1 is not calming down. Skill 1 is learning how to read the room, and the room is your own body. Skill 2, build capacity, widen the window of tolerance. Skill 2 is where most people want to skip because it's not dramatic, it's not exciting, it doesn't feel like you're working on anxiety, but it is the most important thing you will do. There is a clinical concept called the window of tolerance. It describes the zone of arousal within which you can actually function, not hyperactivated and not shut down, just present and available and able to respond. Chronic stress narrows that window over time, which means smaller and smaller triggers produce bigger and bigger responses. Not because you are getting worse, but simply because your capacity container has shrunk. I became a master at having one foot in my window of tolerance and the other foot in my hyper-aroused state all the time. I was never 2 feet in my window of tolerance. So over time, my window became smaller and smaller. And then the littlest of things would send me into literal full panic mode, like checking my mailbox to see a letter from the IRS. Yeah, that's highly concerning, but my body responded like I was immediately under the audit light. I opened the mail only to see it was a change of an address letter, and my body relaxed a little bit. Still with one foot in that hyper-aroused part, still I was never fully chill. Skill 2 is building that window back out through repetitive, low-intensity, bottom-up work. This is why I love weight training for this. Lifting weights offers controlled stress, a cyclic recovery, and it teaches your brain to regulate anxiety, and it also helps to process physical discomfort so you can learn how to return to a grounded baseline. We have to train ourselves how to handle a stressor and then how to return to calm. We can't always do that in the exact moment when we're at a pinnacle of anxiety. I have been training my dog Max. He is a 10-month-old German Shepherd Siberian Husky mix, which means he is a lot. And if you know anything about dogs, I think this is my 7th dog, you cannot teach a dog to be calm when he's already in full red alarm. There is a dog next door that Max does not like. And when that dog shows up, his scruff goes up and he goes into full bark mode and he is completely gone. I am not reaching Max in that moment. He cannot get calm. We have not built that skill yet. What I have to do is practice calm in low intensity moments when he can still hear me, when he can still focus, when the reward can actually register. We build the skill when the system is available. So then it's there when the anxiety comes. We are not different as human beings. So what does that look like in practice? It looks like movement, lifting weights, breathing, co-regulation, intentional muscle relaxation, heart rate training with a wearable, things that work at the level of the body before the thinking brain is even involved. Because that's the level where the window gets built. Capacity has to be built before intensity is handled or applied. Now, here's the part I said I would come back to. Skill 3, the one that most people start with before they did skill 1 and skill 2. So let me show you why it works when the first two are in place and why it backfires without them. Skill 3 is what most anxiety content teaches. The observer capacity, the ability to notice a thought without being swept away by it, to watch an anxious story from the outside rather than living inside of it. This skill is real. The research on it is solid and it does work. Mindfulness practice produces measurable structural changes in the brain's threat detection and rational processing systems. It actually does work. But the research also says this: the ability to observe and reframe a thought, also known as cognitive reappraisal, requires prefrontal cortex availability. And prefrontal cortex availability requires a regulated nervous system. Once skill 1 is in place, when you can accurately read your own baseline and you can catch dysregulation early, before the hose is kinked, before the system becomes out of range. And then once skill 2 is in place, when your window of tolerance is now wider, when you have more runway before you begin to flood. Think of Max. He's over there. We don't just practice calm in the backyard anymore. We practice it at the pet store, at the park, near the dog next door to me, but from a distance so he can still handle it. In my studio, when he sees clients coming in and out all day, each environment adds a little more pressure. Each time he learns, I can come back from this and I can remain calm, and his range grows. That's what skill 2 builds in you. More runway room before you flood, more space to reach for the skill before the skill goes offline. And then skill 3, the observer, the mindfulness, the thought naming, then that actually works. Not because you're trying harder, but because you built the foundation it requires. When the first two skills are practiced and developed, you are not pouring gasoline on a fire. Now the hose is unkinking before the fire is out of control. Now the cognitive tools reach the flame while there's still something that can be done about it. Anxiety isn't the enemy. The skills practiced in the sequence is everything, but I need to tell you something that runs underneath all 3 of these skills. The goal is not to make anxiety go away. It exists for a reason. It's your nervous system doing its job, flagging something that feels like a threat. I want Max to alert me when something is a real danger. I want my fire alarm to go off when there is a fire. The problem isn't the signal. The problem is when the signal is running constantly on a system that never got to rest. And when your response to the signal is to fight it, to suppress it, or fear it, because that's what keeps it running. Because here's what research is clear on. Experiential avoidance, which is trying to suppress or escape the feeling, is what maintains and amplifies anxiety over time. Not the anxiety itself, but rather your relationship to it. What we are building toward is not the absence of anxiety, it's the capacity to work with anxiety, to understand what it is signaling, to sit through its arc without fighting it, to know from experience, not just from understanding, that it will pass. Every time you go through the arc, instead of around it, you expand what you are capable of tolerating. That's not suffering, that is training. If what I have described today feels less like an occasional struggle and more like the permanent baseline of your life, if the window is very narrow, if the baseline is chronically high, and if you have been in survival mode for years, these 3 skills matter more, not less. But they may need to be built with support. Somatic therapy, trauma-informed work, nervous system-focused coaching. These aren't about lying on a couch talking about your childhood. They are about building the foundational skills with someone who can pace the work to your actual window. You don't have to do this alone. find a good therapist to work with, and you don't have to white knuckle your way through it. Here is what I want you to take from this. You weren't failing at managing anxiety. You were handed skill 3 without skills 1 and 2. That's not a failure on anybody's part. That's just a gap in how anxiety is typically taught. Know your baseline, build your capacity, then use the skill in that order. Anxiety doesn't need to be eliminated. It needs to be understood. Your nervous system is not broken. It's just been working without the right sequence. If this landed for you or resonated, if you recognized yourself somewhere in this sequence problem or someone else who may need to hear it, there's more where this came from. I post here every week on nervous system, how to use strength training to help your nervous system, and what it actually takes to build a body that feels regulated, not just functional. Subscribe if that's useful for you, and I'll see you in the next one.